Take a girl and a guy, and they fall madly in love and form a family. Sprinkle in some counseling degrees and a doctorate, a dream of transforming relationships as we know it. And 20 years later, we give you power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Kadkodian. And this is their podcast, Couples Synergy.
Hello, this is Angela, and thank you all so much for joining us tonight for another live stream connections webinar with Dr. Ray, Jean, and myself, Angela. Tonight's topic is how shame impacts our relationships. So to get settled in, I want you to make sure you're in a comfortable spot. Make sure all those other distractions around you are as reduced as possible. Turn off the TV, maybe silence your phone, just so that you can really focus on the topic. And as always, we welcome comments and questions. We want to answer lots of questions tonight, but this definitely is already a Q&A. We're taking some questions that we've received concerning shame because it does impact many, if not all, relationships. And we'd love for you to say hello in the comments, and please share this post right now. Let someone else know about it. If not right now, maybe tomorrow. So without further ado, here's Dr. Ray and Jean.
Hello, Angela, and hello, Couples Synergy Land out there. How's everyone doing tonight?
Doing well.
Last night there is, tonight's actually the full moon. Last night we had 4 owls hooting in the yard, and the coyotes were
it was an owl,
literally howling at the moon.
An owl chorus last night.
That's wonderful.
So if you guys are able to get outside, it's a lot of animal activity right now.
And one thing I'll just mention is we can hear you pretty crystal clear, but I wonder if you can't turn down the mic just a tad bit.
How's that?
I think that's good. And I'll let you know if it needs to be changed. But I'll let you go ahead and introduce this topic, and then I'll be back.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Well, today we're talking about a very, very important topic. I want to thank you all for joining us today. And this topic is about shame. Shame. Gosh, why did we want to talk about this topic?
Shame has gone through a transformation.
Yeah.
And the change of the way our society is and the way that we show up has changed, almost flipped.
Yeah, it's dramatic.
Yeah.
And shame is something that a lot of people are feeling today. It's shame, not just politically, not just medically or health-wise. Shame is permeating our entire society, our entire lives, and ultimately it is permeating our relationships. And that is why we wanted to talk about this. And it's also permeating our business, right? Our work life,
our family,
financial, finances, our family. It is really affecting every single facet of our lives, whether you are aware of it or not. And that is why tonight's topic is really, really important. And we're actually going to be covering just a lot of information too. But we want to remind all of you that this is not just a webinar or a lecture where you just tune in and listen to us get on our soapbox. But really, this is an open forum, okay? And so this is your ability also to shoot out some questions, and let's have a conversation about shame, because it's the things that we don't talk about that hide in the shadows of our lives that wreak havoc on all of us. And when we bring it out into the light, that's when we find true understanding, and that's when we take control and power.
So it isn't actually the emotion of shame that's gone through this transformation, but it is the way that we are being domesticated around shame that is very different than it was 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that we're really looking for is what changed? Why does it feel like the rules have changed? Why does it feel like suddenly everything that was is no longer. And what has happened?
Yeah,
Right.
it has happened. Hey, Tina, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. Yeah, this is, it's really interesting just how, yes, have the rules completely changed. And, they were just talking about this past summer, the Great Resignation, right? I mean,
Yeah, if you haven't heard this term, you'll know now why so many companies are advertising now for help and sign-in bonuses, and restaurants are shutting down, and it seems like there's no workers.
Yes, and there's been this Great Resignation this past summer where people have kind of resigned their positions, and even McDonald's is looking for people to work for them. And so that is one of the impact, that shame has had throughout our society as well. So
let's dive in.
Yeah, let's dive in a little bit.
Let's get some pieces here before we just ad lib.
That sounds good.
So we wanted to kind of give a working definition of shame. And this is from the
Scientific American.
Scientific American. We feel shame when we violate the social norms that we believe in. You think about that. That's a really interesting topic. So we have to have a belief, and we have to belong to a group, and we have to care what that group thinks about us. So those are really important topics and concepts because, when I was a kid, and I've talked about this before, I really belonged to a huge community. We went to this church, St. Emily's, and of course I have 8 siblings. So in every grade, we all had different friends, and my parents knew all the parents of all our friends. And there was always church on Sunday, or the basketball games during the week, or the whatever type of sporting events that us kids brought us together constantly. And on top of that, they would have parties together. They would do all sorts of things together. And so we're by design supposed to live in communities. And when something happens, and it's really interesting, like the first emotion we're going to have when we have pain is shame. Whether that's physical pain if someone hits us, or we fall, or someone says a comment,
hurts us emotionally, or calls us names, or gives us some type of judgment. Yeah, it's the first reaction that we have.
Is shame. And shame is really uncomfortable. And what shame wants to do is hide. So it says that, at such moments, we feel humiliated, exposed, and small, and are unable to look another person straight in the eye. We want to sink into the ground and disappear. Shame wants us to isolate. And the more we isolate and the less we talk about things that hurt us, the more shame we're going to experience. And so by design, if we were going through an experience, like maybe we did something that wasn't very nice, maybe I lost my temper and I called someone a name, and then I felt shame about that because I know in the social norms,
and we've all done that.
Not supposed to do that, right?
Right.
And let's say I would be walking down the street and I come across someone, a neighbor, a friend, a family member, and I say, oh, I just need to talk this out. I just did this thing and I lost it and I can't believe it. So if that were me, and maybe, Ange, you can chime in on this. If I came to either one of you and said, you know what, I feel terrible, I did this thing, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think most people would say, oh, don't worry about it. That it's okay. People do it. It's happened to me before, and, it's okay. We'll just let it go.
So acceptance and normalization.
Yeah.
How about you, Ange?
Yes, same thing, right? It would be listening, and it's not like someone's coming at you with, I don't know, something that you'd be defensive about, right? Someone's coming to you to share something that maybe they don't feel so good about, right? So I think naturally most people's response would be to maybe try to comfort you, to normalize it.
Right, because that's really the nature of human beings. When we see someone else hurting, we want to try to help them. So we're providing some first aid, right?
Especially if we care about them, and we're close to them. Yeah. And that's really the first kind of response you are going to get from people, especially those people that care about you, know you, they are going to try to comfort you. They are going to try to make you feel better about that feeling, because we all know what shame feels like. It's a very, very uncomfortable feeling. And in fact, it is the lowest frequency of all emotions. And so when we feel it, we want to get rid of it, we want to get it out, And so when we see that in someone else, we want to help them get rid of that feeling as well.
So the opposite thing, if we don't share it, is it stays inside of us. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you guys have ever had this experience, or if I'm the only one, that when I'm troubled by something, it just ruminates in my brain. It's like I try to think about it this way or that way. And the more emotionally intense it is, the more it almost just gets stuck in this loop, and you just sort of are beating the same drum, saying the same thing over and over again to yourself, and you can't find that perspective. Mm-hmm. Have you guys ever had that?
Oh, yeah, totally.
I'm the only one, right?
No, everyone does. Everyone has had that experience. Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's how our brain works, and that's why we need each other.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to bring up, what we were talking about in that last slide was about the social norms. Mm-hmm. Okay. So in quotes, right? We feel shame when we violate the social norms that we believe in. So what are social norms? Right. And this brings us back to my statistics class, probably everyone's statistics class. And we talk about the bell-shaped curve, and the bell-shaped curve says that majority of people are within the 68% in the middle of the mean. Right? The mean is the average, and on either side of the average, there's 34%, 34.1, 34 in general. So then that means the majority of people fall within 68% when it comes to ideas, when it comes to concepts, when it comes to beliefs. Our society falls within this category here. Now, if you are outside of the norm, then you are beyond. You're either to the right or you're to the left of these societal norms.
Why is that important?
Oh, yeah. Why is that important, right?
And there's a thing that happens when we're talking about norms, we're talking about majority. If you are a herd of antelope, and you guys have all seen this if you watch National Geographics, and one antelope looks up and looks over there and just sort of freezes. And then it's like the spoon game. Then someone else notices another antelope and starts looking over there and starts looking over there. And one by one, and when 50% of the antelope look in that direction, the entire herd takes off.
I have to just back up because you said the spoon game.
Oh, the other spoon game. The card one where like someone grabs the spoon and then you're like, oh, there's something different. I got to grab spoons. Yes, okay. Right. Not the one where we eat funny things on spoons. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
So that means that we are communicating in a certain way. And so when you look at that bell-shaped curve, the function of shame is to keep us kind of centered and balanced and not too radicalized in a way that separates and divides us. But when you have a norm and people stop believing in it because they don't want to experience shame around it and get back into the center, it could be a function of two things. One, it could be the norm is wrong. The norm is no longer functional for whatever reason, and it needs to change. And you see this in movies like Aaron Brockovich and Norma Ray. Yeah, no, those kind of movies. Geez, we're really old on the movies. Anyways, or that we should experience shame and get back into the center. One of two things, right? One of those, either change it or come back to it. So, Ange, you were talking earlier to me today about an interesting thing that they're trying to change, almost like the belief about something with the Olympic athlete. Can you tell that story?
Yes, I can tell it to the best of my ability. How about let's go there, right? Because there's a lot of information involved, and it's a lot in the news and on social media, right? So I will tell it from my side. So during the Olympics, Simone Biles, superstar athlete, Olympian, right? There was a lot of buzz around her stepping back from at least one event. And the buzz included people being very excited for her. And they talked a lot about mental health and being aware of mental health and taking a mental health break or mental health day, right? Focusing on that. And then there were other people, other buzz talking about other things and saying maybe mean things. And then, so there's a lot of that, right? But then there was one comment, at least one, that said something along the lines of, with judgment aside, let's not confuse quitting with winning.
And that's the change, right? That's the change of a norm, because people are trying to normalize quitting as though that was the winning thing instead of good for her own reasons. They were merging those concepts.
Merging two different things.
Yeah.
Right. They were confusing courage, being courageous, being, prioritizing herself and her life and what is truly important, and they're merging that with winning the Olympics. And, this is where a lot of times, and kind of what we're alluding to is that, the definitions of shame or what should be shameful, we are redefining things. And that's where the rules are changing. Right.
And so, yeah, go ahead, Ange.
Yeah. So, you showed the graph, right, about sort of where social norms fall into, right? So I'm curious, how do we know what the social norm is? I wonder if you have any other details as far as like something other than numbers. And in addition, how do we know when we should experience shame or not?
It's a great question. It's a really great question.
If I go back to the idea of having that community as a child, there was a lot of judgments and a lot of the overculture saying what was normal or not, and the individual person conformed to be part of the group. And I think what's changed in our society as we have become more isolated. We've become more isolated and we've become more private in our stuff. And so now what separates us actually makes us weaker, but we can hide from that place of vulnerability. We'll talk more about that later.
Right.
And instead of just conforming, now we're kind of fighting back.
Well, if you heard our podcast, I think 2 podcasts ago, we talked about community and this lack of community, this loss of community. And so what has happened is that our community norms have become diffuse, right? And so if you are in a small community, there are norms that are created in that community. This is right, this is wrong, okay? And if that's a community of 100 people, then you have a bell-shaped curve of those 100 people, right? And you have 63%, 64%, 68% in the middle believing the same norm. And then you have the people on the fringes who either push against it in either direction, right? Now, we take this community of 100, right? And now we stretch it and we make it a community of 10,000. We make it a community of 1 million, a community of 5 million. And so now you see that the norm is going to be just way, way more diffuse than one belief system within a community of 100. So now our definition of right, wrong, shame, or not is going to completely change because we have now added so much more to the sample population. So when we're talking about that right or wrong, right? I think this is kind of defined it a little bit more. When we're talking about, let's say someone that grew up in a home where they were told all the time or most of the time that they were wrong as a child, always in trouble. It doesn't matter what you do, you're always in trouble. You're going to get it wrong. So just from that perspective, they grow up not knowing the difference between right and wrong, right? Because everything is wrong. And so now what they're doing is they are going to internalize, as a reaction, they're going to internalize that shame. And they're going to believe that I am wrong, right? Everyone else is telling me that I'm wrong. And so now I am
It must be
believing
true.
it must be true. I'm internalizing that shame. Okay. It becomes about me now. It defines me and who I am. Okay. Now, another reaction to that is that it leads to this low self-esteem. Everyone is telling you you're wrong. Everyone is telling you you're bad. And so, yeah, I am going to now believe that I am, and my self-esteem drops. Then it intensifies those internalized feelings of shame, and that increases depression, and it increases anger, right? And anger, as we know, is depression, or turn inward, or depression is anger turned inward, right? And so it's now internalized, is that this is who I am, and I'm defining myself that way.
And that sets up the bully and the victim archetypal energies to battle it out.
Right. Now, in contrast, you take someone who grew up in a home where they were told that they're right all the time, or most of the time, right? Everything that they do is great, is awesome. You did a great job. You fell on your face. You did a great job falling on your face. Participation, trophies.
We're all the same. We should all get the same.
Yes.
No matter what we do.
It doesn't matter, whether you complete it or not. It's your effort, right? And you should be praised for that. And it doesn't matter whether you make a mistake or not. You are praised for it. So you get a lot of positive reinforcement for every single thing that you do. Okay, so this is in contrast. So when we're talking about a contrast to someone who grew up in a home where they're told they were wrong all the time, and then in their home where they're told that they're right all the time, on the other side where they're told they're right all the time, they don't know the difference between right and wrong either, right? Because they're told they're doing everything right, okay? And so that is skewed in the opposite direction, okay? And so, the reaction to that, or as far as the results of that, is that they externalize the shame. Instead of pulling it inward, internalizing the shame, I'm going to externalize it. It's about everybody else. It's everybody else's fault.
Right.
Everybody else did something wrong because I am obviously right. And so this leads to, again, low self-esteem. And it also leads to this excessive externalization feelings of entitlement. And it also increases anxiety instead of depression, anxiety and anger, because now they're worried about what other people are going to think, right? They have to make sure that they maintain the same perfection that everyone else thinks that they are.
Well, they believe that the world is the problem, outside is the problem, and somewhere inside they know they don't have control over that, and that's where that constant anxiety comes from.
Right.
What I want to do is I just want to answer a real quick question.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Wonderful Eric, a great listener, watcher of our live streams, gave you this question. Could a change of generational norms shift shamefulness, or maybe change in group norms shift shame?
Absolutely. Kind of what we're talking about as far as that bell-shaped curve is that as we go through different generations and as our culture starts to shift and our belief system starts to shift, and then also, as I was talking about, this diffuseness of the tribe, okay, or the community. The community now has been stretched so thin because of the internet, because of social media. Now our community is Facebook groups, right? This is on Facebook, but our
and it could be 10. You have 10,000 people
I have this
who watch
many
you,
followers, and so this is my community now, right? And so within the community, the shift of shame fits the community, and what people believe within that community now fits that bell-shaped curve.
So if you think about if a person grows up being told they're wrong all the time, And at some point, they figure that out. They raise their self-esteem. They realize, wait a second, I can't be wrong all the time. And in fact, that being wrong all the time means that they were going against a family norm. And sometimes that can be the black sheep of the family, but sometimes that can be the white sheep of the family. And if someone has that new belief system and they go to parent their own children, they may have this erroneous belief that their child is always right and should never feel bad and should never feel like they've done something and they should feel bad about that because they felt so bad for things they were barely doing, and so that kind of flips the next generation. Mm-hmm. And if enough people have that experience, the whole culture will flip and probably flip again once those people are grown and are having children. And so the impact of our childhood, and I think we have one more slide on that, because it's not just if you were told that you were always right or always wrong, mm-hmm. but also what happens if you're not taught either? So you have no point of reference or an inconsistent point of reference where, maybe your parents don't mention one thing this time and the next time you get in big trouble for it. And you're like, which one is it? I don't know when I'm right or when I'm wrong. And when that happens, no learning is happening. And the feeling is a lack of safety and predictability. And the person becomes distrustful of both themselves internally and the world externally, and attempts to control the external world while blaming themselves internally. So that's a whole nother function of the ways that human beings deal with mm-hmm. this uncertainty and
right. And we're seeing that a lot, mm-hmm. in today's day and age right now, whereas there's a lot more anxiety. There's a lot more worry, because if I can't control what is happening within me, then I need to control everything outside of me. Because if I have control of everything outside of me or my environment, then I am going to feel safe. Then I'm going to be able to predict and have certainty in my life. Whereas we all know that what we're living in right now is this period of time of uncertainty. And because of that, it is very uncomfortable, right? It's very mm-hmm. uncomfortable. And so we need to take control. We need to feel like we need to take control of the environment in front of us.
So I am so interested in what your next slide is, but let me just slide this question in there. When it comes to shame, it seems like a buzzword online. If you Googled shame or how to deal with it or how to heal it, etc., is fragmentation. Could you tell us a little bit about what that means and then what might be the dangers or benefits of it?
Yeah, I was listening to Carolyn Macy the other day, and she was talking about Pythagoras. Remember that guy? Old philosopher guy, kind of came up with our mathematics.
Yeah,
and he said,
in middle school.
Yeah, the whole world is patterns. The planets, they all move at a predictable rate, and the sun moves at a predictable rate, and the moon and the tides and the trees, and everything's following these patterns, and these patterns are measurable, and we're able to predict them and live within them. And she said that when she started studying Pythagoras, he said, you can't really know the one unless you study the whole. And the whole is all one. But what happens when the one isn't whole? Then it's a fragment. Remember our fragments, 1/5 and 2/3 and 7/8. So whenever we
Don't
get
remind me.
fragmented, we lose a wholeness in ourselves, and we have to disconnect from the wholeness of the whole when we're fragmented. So every time we are in a place where we're experiencing shame but not healing it, we're separate from the whole, which actually weakens us and makes us sick. You got to make it bigger. I can't see that.
Yeah.
Oh.
And look at that. We got that little bit in the...
So when we are not in agreement, our groups of belonging fragment. This means that some of the group believes in a different and often opposing norm than the rest of the group, creating a new, smaller subgroup. So if you took a bunch of people that maybe were told they were wrong their whole life, and they bond together and form a motorcycle club, and their new norm is it's good to go beat people up, and you're in that group and you don't do that, well, you're going to feel shame for going against that norm. And that's how it shifts. And
Right.
those are the fragments.
So I think the best example of this is like these groups on social media, right? So it's like it fragments like these belief systems, right? Because of the belief, that this, bell-shaped curve is so diffuse, so stretched, it has to fragment into smaller communities that have the same or share in the same belief system. And so now you create a little group. Right. And in that group, everyone
believes with me.
Everyone believes with me. Everyone has the same belief. And so majority of people, 68% within that group have the same belief system. And so this is that fragmentation that we're talking about. Right. And so you think about, we're not going to get into it, but just in general, you think about politics.
I have a good example though.
Right. You think about religion, those big hot topics, right? You think about COVID. And so people are going to fragment into different groups where they are supported and their belief system is supported. And so now minimizing shame. Right. And so we don't utilize shame as we did when we were in smaller communities, because shame does have actually a positive component to it. Okay. It can have a negative component to it, and that's what people mostly know it as. But this positive component within smaller communities that kept people within that frame of the belief system is gone. Right. And so because it's so more diffuse now, we fragment, we go off into smaller groups where that belief system is in alignment with us, and we are going to be able to minimize our shame.
And we take it to an extreme level of, it's not this behavior I don't like, it's the person. And so the example I was going to give is when I was becoming a mom, people would come and whisper in my ear, oh, you have to bottle feed. Oh, you have to breastfeed. Oh, you have to wear disposable diapers. No cloth diapers. And you realize you're going to disappoint somebody for sure. And there was nowhere to go with it, and it was like, and it's kind of the first experience I had where my tribe didn't all agree. Right. Before that, the more general stuff, don't steal and don't hit people and, go to church on Sunday. Everyone kind of believed all the same. And then all of a sudden it was like different. And you're like, oh, what do I do with that?
And what I want to add, because what you're saying, Jean, like that's very applicable, right? That's very realistic. And I could see something like that's part of a role, right? That could really cause this feeling of shame. But even on a very, let's say a small level, I think of throwing a party. No matter what kind of party it is, like let's say, especially if you're throwing a party for someone else, a surprise party, a baby shower, etc. Absolutely.
Are you throwing a party for me, Ange?
Maybe in the future.
What?
But you can think about how, I think about throwing a baby shower when I was much younger, right? And how I had all this planning. This is especially for people with a good amount of anxiety, right? You plan because you want to prevent problems, but it doesn't matter. I promise there will be problems. Like, and even if you define a problem as someone complaining, someone disagreeing, that will still happen, right? Because a party is a place where you invite lots of different groups, right? Lots of different families, lots of different friends, right? And they're all clashing in the same place, expecting something different.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
right.
when we experience something, it's really our hindbrain really reacting. It's so not logical, right? And so we take it as a personal offense. Like, how dare you chose the color blue because don't you know red's my favorite color and you just don't know me, and our first thing is to withdraw and to disconnect and to isolate, which is what shame wants. That feeds the shame.
So when you think about that example you're talking about, Ange, where you're throwing this party for people that know you, right? And have spent time with you and have, respect for you and like you because they're coming to the party, right? And you still feel this pressure to be perfect. You still feel this pressure to make sure that it's a good time for everybody. And you don't want anyone to have a bad time because then you'll feel shame about it, right? Now you think about going on the internet and stating an opinion that you have, stating a belief that you have. You can absolutely guarantee that someone is going to shame you. Just across the board. Just doing this program right now, I'm sure someone's going to shame us about doing a topic on shame.
Don't you dare
shame
And,
you
and
about
I
shame.
have to add, it hurts a little bit every time for
Yeah,
me. That's
for sure.
speaking on my own.
For sure.
Yeah.
And, Brene Brown talks a lot about shame, right? And she's done a lot of research on shame. And she talks about it from the perspective of it is like going into the arena with no armor on and knowing that everybody in the stands does not have to take the same risk. They are comfortable in the stands and they're able to judge you from the safety of their seat, right? And so you can just expect the fact that people who are not doing are going to shame you. People who are not doing are going to judge you, and so expecting that and knowing that is coming your way is kind of the new norm, really, especially when it comes to being vulnerable in front of people who don't know you, in front of people who don't understand who you are or have respect for you as a human being on this planet. But they can sit behind a place of safety and judge you for what you believe in.
Do you remember the 3 things she talked about with vulnerability?
Yeah, she was talking about the emotional risk. She was talking about the exposure. And she was also talking about the third piece that I totally forgot.
Yeah, but it's the opposite component of shame that says we need to talk about it, we need to share this. And that's what shuts down if we don't have a good enough connection and a place and a space. If you're sitting with someone at the dinner table and you have a difference of opinion, you're not just going to shut it down and run out the door. I mean, occasionally people might, but for the most part, they're probably going to hash it out. And, I remember when we started dating, I was much more of an argumentative person back then. Do you remember that?
What?
And you're like, why do you like to argue so much? And I was like, when you argue with someone who has a difference of opinion and you argue long enough, you find you're saying the same thing. And so it's the emotion underneath that is exactly the same, not the behaviors on the outside. And so when we hate the person and not the behavior, we can't change anything because it's the behaviors that might be something we could trade in for something better if we could hang in there in those difficult conversations.
Yeah, on a smaller scale, I say smaller and bigger at the same time, in a committed partnership, we have said that this is the relationship that you can have the most reward and the most pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about a couple that does not take that time to truly understand each other, whether they have difference of opinion or not, it doesn't matter, right? If you truly understand a person's position, even though they have a contrary, opinion to yours, you find respect for them. You find compassion for them. And so couples who don't get to that place, they don't push through that to that place of true understanding, they tend to use shame as a weapon.
I just had a really fun thought.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. And after your fun thought, we're going to take a question we got.
Okay. What if every time you were trying to have a difficult conversation with your spouse, if you chose to be emotionally vulnerable, they had to take off a piece of clothing, the other person. So they had to get physically vulnerable at some point you're exposed, right? Either in your heart or physically. Isn't that kind of fun?
Oh,
Challenge out there. Let us know if you guys try that, how it goes.
I think it's a couple synergy game.
Okay, Ange, what do you got?
Well, it sounds similar to one of your podcast episodes. And this one was like from about a year ago about how do you diffuse when there's, I guess, an argument, but mostly when at least one partner is angry, right? Like, and it sounds like that's one of those things. You already know that something might be hard, a discussion might be hard. So that might be an attempt at diffusing it, right? Let's make it a little easier.
Yeah,
And,
I'm so mad at you, but you were just vulnerable right now, so I got it.
or like cranky shirts. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. When someone's being cranky, they have to, the one partner has to put on like a special cranky shirt or whatever, you know. And that's like, I think that's, those are so many layers to diffusing, right?
I heard this one joke. It's funny because he was like, next time your wife says she's really pissed, go get a towel, put it on her shoulders like this, and said, now you're super pissed.
Oh man, that one might be on the borderline. Okay, so
and then you're dead.
We got another question.
All right, what do we got here?
All right, so do you stand firm in your convictions to avoid feeling shame? How do you work with that in a relationship?
Here's Eric with his interrogation here. These are great questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric.
Yes.
This is a really good one.
The best.
I would say the truth is always in the middle. That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Is if you feel very, very strongly about something and you're attacking your partner over it, it's because you really don't have that conviction. What you have is fear.
Yeah, I think
and uncertainty.
To fully answer that question, I think we need to differentiate between guilt and shame. Okay, because that actually is really going to, it's going to add some foundation here. Okay, so when you think about guilt, all right, it uses the verb of doing. So this focuses on correction of behavior because you made a mistake. I made a mistake. I hurt someone else. And so I need to correct that behavior. Okay, that's why I feel guilt. I did something bad. I have to change that. You know, I have to change my behavior. Now, shame, that focuses on the verb or uses the verb of being. And it focuses on the self and finding the self to be unworthy of belonging. So it defines you. I am bad. I didn't do something bad. I am bad. So now what happens is that it is a definition of who you are. Right. And so that is where the hard part is here, because it could be static. Right. And if you believe that you're bad, then a lot of times it can influence your behavior to do more bad.
Right. Or it can lead you to an opportunity of, how do I change my self-worth? How do I really evaluate?
Right.
Because if we've been keeping it a secret, we absolutely have to find someone, whether that's a therapist or a small group at church or some friend that's a confidant, to get these ideas out of our head of the small domestication that we learned as children into this bigger picture. So we find out where that fits in. And that's how we know if our convictions are off or not off. Well, so when we're with our partner.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to Eric's question, you know, about our convictions about avoiding feeling shame. Okay. So no, we are not saying that you should avoid feeling shame. Okay. Shame is an emotion. We all have emotions. We have emotions for a reason. Each one of them serve a function in our life. They are there to tell us that something is happening and that we need to attend to it. Okay. And if we avoid any of the feelings, any of them, meaning we're stuffing them down, we're not looking at them, anything that we avoid wreaks havoc in our life. So when shame comes up, and shame is the root of all addictions and addiction cycles. Okay, because shame will feed that addiction cycle. And what happens is that when people try to avoid that feeling, what they do is they, use some type of behavior, addictive behavior, to avoid feeling that. And then that makes them feel more shameful, which feeds that cycle. So the avoidance of shame, not a good thing. Understanding, right, or finding an understanding of the shame that we're feeling is the most important part. Okay. And that is where we need to explore. If we have shame coming up in our relationship, we have to ask those questions. What is it? Why is it that I'm feeling this right now? Does it have to do with my partner? Does it have to do with me? Does it have to do with this situation currently? Or is it bringing up a situation from my past? Which most often it is. Okay. Is it bringing my past into the present? And that's why I am feeling shame in this current moment. And now when we are sharing that with our partner, we become a team in understanding the wounds that we both carry into the relationship. And now we actually have this opportunity to heal it in each other. So this is where shame can become a tool.
Yeah, and it's a really big deal. It's like if you were a child and you wore the color green to school, and on that day, anyone who wore green wasn't allowed to go out for recess and had to stay inside and clean. And there was a big discrimination against the color green. And green people who chose green were bad people, and they should be, removed from the group. Well, you're not going to go to school the next day and say, hey, I really love green. Even if you do, you're going to go, oh, green. I hate that color too. I would never wear that. I would always wear yellow or whatever it is. And this is saying, like, show up in green and see what happens now. Because there was a part of your life where it was dangerous, either emotionally or physically, to expose something that you felt a conviction about because the group would have rejected you. And if the problem is within the group, how do you challenge that? How do you begin? That's scary. It's hard. And so this is in the safety of what we call the sanctum of your relationship. If you've, watched Relationship 101, our home study course, that's that sacred space for you and your partner where you can be completely exposed. You could say green is, maybe I'm a horrible person, but I love green. I can't help it. It's who I am. And figure that out. I know it's a dumb example, but you get the point, right?
Well, it reminds me of the luck of the Irish. A little leprechaun.
And, I have one more comment to make before we get to probably our last question that we can do tonight is, when I'm hearing you with that example, Jean, about green and being in school, I'm sure if everybody really took a moment to think about it, there's something during school, during their school years that they felt shame regarding. And, I'm thinking one of my buzzwords that comes to mind is like this idea of being, maybe it's alienated, right? Because your status of being poor is not in the norm. And this depends, again, on the group that you're around, right?
Mm-hmm. And that can be anything. It can be what religion you are. It can be what sport you practice. It could be if you have money.
How well you do in school.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're an honors class, maybe you're like at the bottom of the honors class, and now you are feeling like not part of the norm, right? Versus being part of more of a traditional class, and now you're at the top of it. Okay. And so it really shifts with the environment that you're in, the group that you conscribe to, or that you're with in this day and age, conscribe to, and what the social norms are for that group.
And that's why it's so important to start seeing each other as human beings and not human doings, and that we accept each other on a basic fundamental level. And if the person is an unhealthy person and you need boundaries with them, absolutely, we conscribe to that. But stop making people unworthy. and shunned and alienated. And let's get inclusive and try to understand, because that's the real way out. And that secures our safety and our survivability so much more in the world than being right. Or saying, if I'm right and you're wrong, you're dangerous to me. We just have a difference of opinion. And, let's still break bread together and be part of the human race and be whole instead of fragmented, and see all the different colors that we are and allow it to be part of the whole. That's where the real healing is.
And to understand, what shame or what purpose shame serves in our life, right? And in our relationship. I mean, to use an example, it was a couple that we were working with where, one person wanted to get divorced and also felt a lot of shame around that. The shame felt like it was a failure. Okay. And so what that person did was surrounded themselves with friends who were already divorced. And so within that group, that person joined or created in their life, now they were able to avoid that feeling of shame because now it was being normalized, right? And didn't learn what that lesson was about feeling that shame.
And how to heal it.
Regardless of whether the relationship was going to survive or not, whether they made the decision to leave or not. Avoiding shame and avoiding the lesson that is presenting for us, the potential for learning, is a missed opportunity.
And can you really quickly tell us what might happen if we internalize shame or versus if we externalized shame?
It's a great question. I think I might have a slide about that. Oh, look at that.
When we internalize shame, it increases our ability to take responsibility because we're already blaming ourselves, and so that's what power means. Power means I can choose. And so it's not so much that we have to accept feeling bad. We can say, this feels bad. What do I do with it? Because ultimately, we have to change our internal world, which we can't do if we sit in there by ourselves, right? We need another person that we can share with that's safe. This is why people go to AA meetings and they share and they say, here's something I feel ashamed of that I did today or last month or 5 years ago, because that's what's got its grip on me, right? And we need people around us to reflect something else, to lift us to a higher place, because shame is actually our lowest frequency. And unfortunately, when we're in the place of externalized shame, it decreases our ability to change because we think the responsibility lies outside of us and that the world owes us something and the world is going to change for us. And it doesn't work that way. The outside of us doesn't care because we don't have any power to choose for that. And everyone's choosing for a different reason. And so what happens when we're externalized is we don't look at another person with compassion and empathy. And we think they are all bad and I am all good. And that's a really dangerous place to be in because it locks up you and everyone else. And so somewhere again in the middle is healthy. Somewhere in the middle that says, I can be okay with me, you be okay with you, and wherever our paths can sort of meet, we'll be there in a safe place. And wherever they don't, well, good luck. But I don't not wish you well. Because in the end, who really knows? Who really knows what's right or wrong? Who knows? About anything.
Well, apparently it's relative, depending on what group you're in.
Yeah.
Oh, I think Brad has actually, he got that third piece that I was missing from Brene Brown, right? The 3 elements of
uncertainty,
shame, uncertainty. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate that. Yes, risk and emotional exposure. Those are 3 elements that Brene Brown talks about as far as the components of shame.
And we've talked about uncertainty before. Uncertainty is what happens when you do something new and different, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you go with what you always know and you're in your logical brain, you feel more certain, you feel less shame, but you keep doing the same thing over and over again, maybe not getting the results you want. When you step in what your heart wants of uncertainty, it's that vulnerability and risk. And that is our fertilizer. It's the only way we grow.
Which is why relationships are so complex, right? You see how much work it takes just within your own self. Now you take two people together trying to figure things out, being the most vulnerable that you could ever be with another human being. Wow, what could go wrong, right? I mean,
who has a difference of opinion?
Yeah, right. And so
in your own group, there is no norm because there's only two people. You can't bell shape that.
Yes. A group of two.
Well, thank you, everyone. This was a great topic for me.
Yes, thank you for doing this tonight, and we'll keep everyone posted on our next live stream. And, if you haven't already, you should absolutely sign up for Connections. If you do Couple Synergy, you will go to our website, couplesynergy.com.
Yes, and that's where you sign up for Connections, you're going to get a reminder about our upcoming connections so that you can set that reminder and, show up for it. Also, I don't know if you can kind of post the Relationship 101 link, for anyone who is interested in that home study course. That is an 8-module video course for couples to really help them understand the foundations necessary in order to, further their relationship. And so
set up like date night.
It's definitely set up like date night. It's something that the two of you can do together. The videos are about 30 to 40 minutes a piece. And then at the end, there's some discussion questions that kind of facilitate, a good, conversation between the two of you. And they're set up in a cumulative fashion. So it kind of helps you become more vulnerable over time as you do it. Okay. Highly recommended. It's kind of a culmination of like all of the things that we have put together and learned over the 20 years of doing this and helping couples. So, that is definitely recommended.
And, like we said, shame is one of our most painful emotions, our lowest frequency. So if you know someone who's struggling with shame and could benefit from listening to this, please share it with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, if any of you are looking for great ideas for date night, you can always look up theadventurechallenge.com. We did a podcast interviewing the founder of the company. We highly recommend. It's a great book with some awesome ideas, like very innovative ideas for date night for couples. They do have a adventure challenge for families and for friends as well, if you're interested in that. But for couples specifically who are looking for something new, because we always promote doing something new and exciting together, right? Because what's that going to do, right? It's going to increase happiness, increase bonding. So if you look up theadventurechallenge.com and you want to purchase one of the books for couples, just use Couple Synergy as a coupon code at the end and you will get a discount. Awesome.
Until next time.
Until next time, synergize your life and synergize your love.
Thanks, Angie.